In 1944, legendary British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery was instrumental in the liberation of Brussels. Montgomery was disliked by much of the British Army at the time on account of his direct manner and lack of diplomacy. Few remember his brutish manner today. What they remember, as the statue of Montgomery in Brussels testifies, is that he freed Belgium from tyranny. Montgomery's boss was Winston Churchill, the lionized British Prime Minister, claimed by some as the real father of the United States of Europe, and by others as an icon of British independence. As Britain prepares to go to the polls on June the 23rd, a lack of diplomacy and split personality in Europe seem ever present.
I think we're going to do a handshake.
Britain has always been the awkward one at the table of Europe, the disruptor, the fighter. But Britain has, twice within a century, rescued Europe from German dominance and helped rebuild a stronger continent.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's now go to the commemoration of Waterloo, a moment when the Germans arrived just in time to help prevent the domination of Europe. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin.
Is the awkward one about to do it again? Or is the Brexit referendum the final retreat from the front line?
What do you think will happen if Britain decides to leave the European Union?
Well, first of all, it would make Europe poorer and Britain weaker. And obviously we would all lose, because the strength of Europe is based on its diversity and the strength of its members, and the UK is a key member. Therefore, in particular when it comes to our global power to shape the world as Europeans, we will lose a lot if the UK leaves.
What will the inward investment impact be on the UK if they vote to leave?
We have to bear in mind that over 50% of our foreign direct investment into UK right now comes from continental Europe, so elsewhere in the EU. Will that remain after we vote to leave? I suspect not. So there are some very big consequences here.
In the event of a leave vote, we don't know what the new trading arrangements, market arrangements, policy arrangements would end up being. So there are some real risks to the UK's ability to access the internal energy market in the future. That could have impacts on energy prices, could have impacts on planned investment in interconnection, for example. But currency movements could be as much of a risk as any of the more formal legal and policy and political agreements.
If we leave the EU, there'll be nothing on our statute book. So all the things to do with banking regulation, our market infrastructure, all the things we've done post the financial crisis, we'd have to redo through the national parliament in order to have similar legislation on our statute book going forwards.
In the medium term, the obvious issue for business is uncertainty. So there would be a 2-year period of negotiations, but nobody believes that 2 years is going to be enough. This is far too complicated. So we expect it to be much longer if there was going to be a vote to leave.
If Britain votes to leave, will they actually leave, or will it be a new negotiation, a deal 2.0?
Well, I have here to agree with our finance minister, Mr. Schäuble. He told very openly it will be a very expensive deal, because obviously the UK needs the access to the common market, but it will not be a cheap deal to get it, because obviously Europe will want that the UK still follows the rules we vote in Europe in order to have fair competition, and that would be a high price for our British friends, because they would have not the possibility anymore to shape these rules.
Is Britain's referendum a moment for Europe to plant new seeds of democracy and economic reform, or is Brexit sowing the seeds of the EU's destruction?
Is extreme deregulation possible within a global market?
I think that's a very good question, and I think competition policy and making the EU competitive has formed part of the UK negotiations with the EU to date. The agreement that David Cameron signed with the EU in February this year did include a section on competition policy and how to make the EU more competitive. Part of that is just to drive the ongoing EU's commitment to making regulations less of a burden on companies, faster, deeper and stronger. But the EU is doing this anyway. So I think in terms of deregulation, I think there is somewhat of a risk and we need to be aware of that. But I don't think we should overstate the case.
If the UK votes to stay, how will its relationship with Europe change? Will Britain be diminished in the EU, or will it be a new opportunity for the UK to lead?
It's a perfect opportunity for us to lead. What this would give us is a mandate, and certainly give our Council of Ministers the mandate to come here and actually push the reform agenda that's already started, but to get it way down the track. We have the presidency of the European Union in 2017. I think this gives us an opportunity to really come with a reform agenda, to come with a new plan for Europe, and to actually help lead it in the right direction, and one in the image that the UK itself would like it to see it go.
Do you foresee a treaty within the next 5 years?
Well, I think at least there has to be true changes to the Eurozone. So therefore, I hope also that there will be a treaty change. But if anyone believes that this will be, well, like a renationalization, I think that will not come. The Eurozone needs a deepening. I believe we also need a deepening in our power to the external world, so our foreign policy have to be more integrated, but not everybody has to join.
I get told regularly back home that the UK has no influence, we get outvoted on everything. I just don't see it that way. What I see, and what I see from lots of experts in the public affairs business here, is that the UK punches above its weight on a consistent basis, and that's good for the UK.
Are people preparing to vote with their heads or their hearts?
It seems from the polling that whilst in the past it's been extremely volatile and there have actually been swings in both directions of sort of many percentage points, that during the actual campaign things have become a lot tighter, and at a lot of points during the campaign it's absolutely neck and neck.
This week, ICM, the polling company, published 2 EU referendum polls. ICM's online poll showed the Leave campaign leading by 4 points, and ICM's telephone poll gave the Remain campaign a 10-point lead. They can't both be right.
One of the things that people suggest is that online polling tends to be self-selecting. People who care passionately about an issue will seek out and participate in online polls, and people feel that that probably favours the Leave vote. But there also tend to be age differences in the way that people respond, because there's a suggestion that actually online polling doesn't necessarily reach older people, and it may not reach people who just don't have kind of ready access to the internet. Now, interestingly, older people and people on lower incomes are mostly likely to vote to Leave.
BuzzFeed's Europe editor, Alberto Nardelli, observed that telephone polls are consistently showing strong Remain leads, while online surveys paint a much closer contest, with several putting Leave ahead. Most political commentators argue that telephone polling is demographically more accurate, but Nardelli says that equally convincing arguments have been put forward to suggest that online polling will have the upper hand in the referendum.
Even though, on the balance of probability, a majority of the UK population and UK voters will support Remaining, actually a majority of Conservative Party members are trending towards exit. So actually the internal dynamics of the Conservative Party, internal dynamics of UK politics, will actually make the UK position in the EU potentially difficult for some time to come.
Lynton Crosby was one of the few that predicted the general election outcome. What does he have to say about this?
He thinks that it's really critical to get the vote out. So the signal that he's giving is that he's confident, I think, that they've run a good campaign in terms of convincing swing voters. But essentially now, it's terribly important that people who care about the issue and have made up their minds get out and vote.
Montgomery's lack of diplomacy and Churchill's vision for Europe may continue to shape the European Union. If Britain votes to stay, it will remain the awkward one, the disruptor, and perhaps that's what Europe needs, a thorn in its side to ensure constant reform.
My feeling is that being in the EU is a significant force multiplier for the UK, and that's seen very clearly in our relationship with the US. There's lots of things that we have that would not change lots of advantages that we have that would not change in the event of a vote to leave. But we would miss out on the opportunity to extend our influence even further through our membership of the EU.
The Brexit vote, whichever the result, is unlikely to be the last word, and Britain is unlikely to surrender her place on the world stage. Montgomery suffered his defeats, but ultimately, with the help of the Americans and the support of a proud resistance across continental Europe, peace was restored and the economy soared.